Welcome everyone to a conversation with adventure photographers Eliza Earle and Ted Hesser. We're very excited to talk to these two today. It's going to be a fun chat, talking about some of their favorite photos, their go-to gear, some personal projects along the way, and then some dedicated Q&A. So before we jump into some photos, I wanted to officially introduce our guests. Eliza Earle, New England-born, Colorado and France-based adventure sports photographer and filmmaker. She spent the last 4 years living out of her van, shooting a few of the world's best athletes in climbing, trail running, and mountaineering. Excuse me. Her client list includes Amazon Prime Studios, Patagonia, The North Face, and Eddie Bauer, among many others. Welcome, Eliza.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Ted here is an adventure photographer and filmmaker focused on mountain sports. Prior to becoming a full-time creative, he worked in the clean energy industry for nearly a decade, which we'll speak about a little bit. And his clients include Black Diamond, The North Face, National Geographic, Marmot, Mountain Hardwear, Goal Zero, and Real Rock, among others as well. Welcome, Ted.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
All right, before we jump in, just want to reiterate this will be recorded. We're going to run through some photos, some moments, some questions. So stick with us, but if you have to run before the hour is over, we will be sharing a recording next week. So let's jump into some photos. We're going to start with Eliza. Here's a shot that she shared with us, and we're going to talk a little bit about her work.
Cool. Yeah, this photo is from Yosemite on the side of El Cap. It's my buddy Nick Berry. He's trying to free climb this route called the Dihedral Wall. And I took this last fall early in the morning, and I chose this photo just because, to me, my whole career sort of started with rock climbing, and the photography all started with rock climbing. So I just thought it'd be a fun place to start. And secondly, Yosemite is just a super special place to me. It's where a lot of my climbing photography has grown and developed over the years. It's where my outdoor community is really, centered around. It's where my network has grown extensively. Yeah, and Yosemite is just like a super beautiful place and really, really fun to take photos. I love this photo, not because it's not the best climbing photo that I've ever taken, but again, it's just sort of like represents some, I don't know, some history of my career a little bit, or it sort of like represents sort of this like combination of the adventure photography world, which is essentially like you need to be able to take a photo, but you also need to go out and do these sports. And so I grew up rock climbing as a kid, and I've always been really comfortable with this sport. And so, hanging on the side of a cliff, I don't think we're even like that high up here. I think we're maybe like 1,000 feet, which is about a third of the way. No, maybe not even 1,000 feet. It might only be like 600 feet or something like that. But I'm just like dangling from a rope, shooting the photos, and there's this level of comfortability that comes with getting these photos. But that's because of years and years of climbing myself and knowing the sport well. But Nick is a really good buddy of mine, and in some ways he's also been a mentor for me over the years. He's a super dialed big wall climber, free climber, but he climbs on really, really big walls. And this morning, the day before, we were hanging out just down in the valley in our vans, and he was like, I'm gonna wake up really early and go try the crux pitch of this route that I'm working on El Cap. Do you want to come shoot photos? And I was just like, absolutely. Took advantage of it, went out that morning with him. We jugged all the way up to the portal edge. Jugging is just basically, there's a whole bunch of fixed lines that are kind of attached to the wall, and you can climb the ropes really easily without actually having to rock climb. And so you can get up, 600 feet really, really quickly, just so that he can work this one route or this one pitch. And Yeah, I don't know. It was just a special moment. He sort of like helped me set up a couple lines. I mean, he had fixed the line that I'm even like dangling on right now. And it just like, I don't know, it's a nice moment of teamwork of just sort of like you and the athlete working together to try and compose a really cool photo.
Yeah, and how do you, I love this shot. How do you get up to where you're at? Because from the viewer, it almost looks like you're floating, or it's not, it doesn't look like drone photography, but it looks
Yeah.
like, you don't see where you're coming from really. So it's interesting.
Yeah, so again, there's more fixed lines above me. So just these static lines that you're not really climbing on, but you're kind of clipped into with these ascending devices. They're kind of like these big handles that clip into the rope, and then you can kind of climb the rope. And so this rope, he's been working this route for a while, and so he had already rigged the rope, I think, a couple days or a week before or something like that. And it was attached to that little portaledge that's down in the corner. And so once we kind of climbed up to that ledge, I just clipped in the rope, climbed up the rope, and then you just coil the rope below you so it's not dangling into the frame. And then, once you're dangling there, there's so many different fun ways that you can take a photo while hanging on the cliff. And one of the easiest ways is to jump away from the wall and take a bunch of shots. And then you just sort of feel like you're floating out in the air a little bit more. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Exhilarating.
It's fun. It's so fun.
All right, Ted, let's talk about this shot.
Sure. Yeah, well, I guess I'll just first say, like, thanks you guys for hosting this and organizing it. And nice to be here with you as well, Eliza.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, this shot, I put for, you asked for some of my favorite photos. This is maybe my favorite photo, mostly because the climb itself was really meaningful for me. This is climbing the California honor route on Mount Fitzroy. And I had tried to climb Fitzroy the year previously via the Super Canaletta route and not succeeded. And it's one of the few routes that I've really fixated on from a alpine climbing perspective. I just really wanted to climb this route for a number of years. I think partly because of the history and the lore around it. Basically, Yvon Chouinard and Doug Tompkins and some others climbed this route in the 60s. They did the first ascent, and they made a film about it, and it was kind of like the origin story of the outdoor industry, really. They each went on to found Patagonia and the North Face, and Black Diamond spun out of Patagonia, and there's other characters involved, but it's kind of like where the outdoor industry, a lot of it came from. So I was very intrigued to climb this route. I don't know how they did it back then with the gear that they had and without weather forecasting. They supposedly like lived in a snow cave up at the high col, which is just crazy to me for how bad the weather is. But this is of that whole climb, this is probably my favorite shot. I like the compositional elements of it. It's difficult to achieve kind of balanced compositional elements when time is of the essence and you're competing against a lot of constraints. Like there's only so much food that we have, there's only so much fuel. We're already minimizing the weight that we carry to the most extreme degree possible so that we can climb fast enough that we don't get stuck in bad weather. It's pretty sad, but actually just the window before this climb, where myself and Vitaly climbed it, there were 3 individuals who did pass away on this route, and they were like still there while we were climbing it. On the way down, we passed them, and it was like serious. Like it felt very committing. It took 4 days to climb the route, and by the time you're all the way up on top, you're like days away from getting down, basically, and you don't know if the weather's going to change at that point, and it all just is like it's a psychological experience.
Sure.
But yeah, no, this image just really, that's why I chose this image. But I think there's a lot of, being an adventure photographer, should be about like having rad adventures, among other things. But that's that's the draw, at least for me.
Yeah. Ted, for moments like these, or like, rigorous hikes and, sad moments like these that you come across, do you ever, does it ever stop you from feeling inspired, creative? You want to put the camera away. Maybe at the moment you're like, forget about the assignment or anything like that.
There are definitely moments like that. It's really a fine line, and it depends on it depends on a lot of things. It depends on what the objective is, or if I'm in documentary filmmaking mode and I'm hired to make a film or something, and there's a really difficult moment happening, I need to be filming it, unless it's really just not going to be okay to film it. But that's pretty unusual. But if I'm I never want to do anything that's like deeply disrespectful to
Sure.
the people I'm around, or the families of some. You don't want to do things like that. You want to celebrate people and celebrate these places and all of that. So I don't know, it's a really situational question, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah. And Ted, when we had met, we were talking about the leading lines in this photo and how they're super strong. Yeah. And Christopher was asking just about the sort of pink line that you see, and if you could talk about that a little bit.
Oh yeah, so that's a rope. This was I was hired by Black Diamond for the month and a half I was down there to create images for them. So all the rope is a Black Diamond rope. It was their new rope at the time, and the backpack and the red puffy and all of that was sort of like new stuff that Black Diamond wanted imagery of. And so that's what makes it commercial, really, because it's relevant to a brand's newer product lines, or it was at the time. And the rope, I just love, like, compositionally how the rope kind of mirrors the Torre mountain range behind, even a little swoop kind of right around the subject. It just has a really nice balance to it. And I was trying to do that. This was one of maybe 2 or 3 times that we stopped to really try to get a shot, because it just seemed like such a shot. The light was really nice, the clouds and the whole atmosphere. And so we spent maybe 30 minutes here, like, trying different things. And I was like flicking the rope with my left hand, trying to, like, the classic climbing photographer.
Yeah.
And this one just came out. So
it always helps when the products are like super, neon, lightly, nicely lit up.
If anyone's a product designer on this, please make more color.
Yeah, it's worse when they make like a gray jacket and you're just like, oh no, this is terrible.
Yeah, good for travel and hiking anyways, like safety measures and such, to have like bright, very noticeable colors anyways.
Yeah.
Red is good. Yeah.
Very cool.
Makes photographers
All right,
happy.
Let's hear about this one, Eliza.
Cool. This photo is different. I chose it because it's so different. I'm not a surf photographer. I'm not a water photographer. But I think it's really fun as an adventure photographer to sort of get out of your comfort zone and try different things. And so a couple years ago, I bought an underwater housing for my camera when I sort of got into surfing. I'm terrible at surfing, but I really, really like it. I think it's super fun. And I just think shooting water is really fun. But this is actually a shot from last fall in Fiji. I was working down there filming for a TV series documenting this giant adventure race through the jungle for a month. And it was a major suffer fest. We were like running with these teams, filming them day in and day out, really physical, really kind of like type 2 fun / work. Anyways, when we wrapped, we had about 2 or 3 days before we got on the plane to fly home. And a bunch of the crew members and I, we were done working, done shooting. We were just hanging out at the hotel, and we were like, we should take advantage of the world-class surfing that's in Fiji. So we chartered a boat and we went out. This photo, one of the reasons why I chose it is because I think in adventure photography, there are moments where it's great to, like, you have like the perfect scenario and you want to get the perfectly posed shot of, let's say surfing, someone like barreling down a pipeline, and it's just crisp and beautiful and perfect and magnificent. But for me, one of the reasons why I really like adventure photography is sort of those like raw in between moments of capturing a photo that at the end of the day you're like, oh, that was really lucky. Like I took advantage of the opportunity that I was in to create a cool photograph, but it was like a lot of random, luck that kind of like came in to like help you make it. And in this photo, this crew member and we were just kind of like messing around on our surfboards. A wave had just come in and just sort of like flew into the water. And I remember just being underwater, not even really being able to see anything. And I just like shot a couple photos. And I remember when I came back, like, yeah, there were some cool surf photos, but like these ones just really stood out to me. Just sort of this like capturing the movement right as he's coming up for a breath. And then what I just like too is he's still wearing, like the crew uniform that we had to wear while we were filming this whole race. And so to me, it just sort of like epitomizes, the end of this mega epic adventure that we had down in Fiji last fall.
Yeah, I love this. Can you talk a bit about like underwater photography in general, or like putting that kind of gear on a camera? Because for me, I mean, I'm sure other people are curious, but it's more of a selfish question, I guess. Like, I'm very curious how you do that with a camera, or if you need a special sort of.
Well, so this one actually isn't even like that technical of a setup. I think I actually shot this on it's a Sony Rx100, and Sony makes a really small underwater housing for that camera. And like all in all, it's pretty inexpensive actually. And that's one of the reasons why I just like picked it up and brought it with me to Fiji. There's certainly mega underwater housings that you can, buy for your big cameras, and those are sweet. But this is fairly simple. But the other thing is, it is the underwater housing that I have at least is like a little bit limiting. Basically, once you put the camera in, you can't really change your settings too much. And so before I jumped in the water, I kind of just like, quickly calibrated in my mind just like what I thought might be the right exposure. I mean, I'm pretty sure I just actually sort of kept it on like aperture priority, just sort of like kept the shutter speed moving. So jumped in and just kind of like went with it. And I mean, 50% of the photos that came out of this were like super blurry and horrible, but
it's still low probability shooting underwater almost all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Very low probability shooting scenario.
I mean, and that's one of the reasons why I like this photo is I remember coming back to my computer and just being like, oh, sick, something actually turned out. Like, that's awesome. I feel like that's most of the time with adventure photography is like, you don't have that much time to really like dial it in and get it perfect. You're just kind of like, I hope I'm good enough to make these like snapshot decisions. And then when you go back, it's like, yeah, some of the photos are like, nope, nope, nope. And then you're like, oh, that came through. That's awesome.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Ted, let's talk about this shot.
Yeah. So this was a shot in March of this year. I was very fortunate. I happened to get 2 assignments this winter to go to Antarctica, 2 different, just random, really, 2 different assignments. And I spent a lot of the winter there. The first one was into the interior, climbing Vincent Massif twice and trying to climb Mount Tyree, which is the second tallest peak there on the continent. And then the second one was by boat to the peninsula for a film project. And this photo was basically as the boat was leaving the peninsula after all of that time there. And so it just, it's a nice memory. It's kind of a nice, exclamation point to a chapter of life. And it's a really cool photo, I think, compositionally, and the tones and the color, it just really evokes the sense of place and what it felt like to be there. it was also one of the few photos I think that I took that was really good while I was there, which is sort of a regret. But I'm pretty sure, I don't know for a fact, but I'm pretty sure that COVID was on the boat. Like almost positive, because I certainly got very sick, and dozens of other people got very sick. And this was before the world sort of like, reacted to it. It's probably late February, and there was certainly a lot of news about China at that point in time, and there was maybe just starting to be news about Italy at that point in time and Iran, but it wasn't like, it was more like early March that the world just sort of like clicked into over to like, oh fuck. Sorry, shouldn't curse. Maybe that's an appropriate curse though for.
Sure.
But yeah, no. So I was like sick, and it was such a beautiful place, and it was, I really didn't get that much. I mean, for me, I just feel like for how beautiful the place was, I only got some really good images. This was my favorite image of the whole trip, and I was super sick when I got. It's like I saw what was, because the boat was leaving, and the icebergs and the mountain range were sort of like lining up, but they were like kind of like too separated away, and I was on a deck, and then I kind of was like, oh, I gotta go grab. So I ran down and to this lower level where the room was, and grabbed my camera and the big lens, 600 millimeter, and like ran back up, and I'm like really, I probably only ran like 40 feet, but I'm like dying, and just trying to to line it up and keep the camera stable enough that it's sharp enough, and then birds were flying all around, and I took a bunch of image. I was just like holding down the shutter like bup, 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 bup. And one of them just had a really cool pattern with the birds that just stood out as like magical. So yeah, that's the story of this photo.
Yeah, I'm sure that it felt good after not getting too much, according to you, that you leave and this photo is in your camera.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely. Yeah, made it feel like, okay, it's okay, I got like a real keeper.
That's awesome. All right, Eliza, how about this one?
Yeah, so this photo was from a assignment that I did with Patagonia in the Dolomites 2 years ago, I think. But it was a really fun shoot. Essentially, I was hired to document this week where they had a handful of their trail running athletes meet up with their product developers. And we just like hung out at this mountain hut for a number of days. And in the mornings, they'd all get together and they would show them basically all these prototypes of I think it's out now, the high endurance kit for summer 2020, but we were testing it 2 years ago. And the runners would kind of like go through it and be like, okay, yeah, this looks cool. This looks cool. Like I would never use that. This jacket is nice. And then they'd go and they take it for like a 25-mile run later that day and come back the next day and sort of like see how it's going. But one of the things that I really liked about this assignment and that I really like about working with Patagonia is they have a really cool model of photography where they don't really do commercial photo shoots. They don't really hire in models and a week of like, we're going to shoot down this jacket and these shorts and get all these like perfect images. They basically just have a roster of photographers that they work with who they know are going to be going out into the mountains and taking photos anyways. And then we just sort of end up like sending in all of our images at the end of like a month or two, and they just sift through them, and they're looking for those real moments of people getting out and after it. And so what was fun about this shoot is that, something that they don't usually do, they actually did hire me to come out with, a group of them for a week. But the focus was still, they were very strict about it. They were like, this isn't posed, this is still like, just follow them and just document and just like see what you get. That's what we're looking for. And I think that's what I really enjoy most in my career is the intersection of, just like trying to keep up with these athletes, trying to have the foresight to see what's going to be a really good photo, and getting in position, seeing where the light is coming from, and you really only have like a minute to set up and like get the shot. And yeah, you know, I love trail running too. That's like one of my other main sports. And I also just think as a means of staying in shape, it's really, really good to just like hike a lot, run a lot, and after a while, you know, the camera doesn't feel so heavy in your bag. Especially in this line of work, like when you are finally hired to go out and shoot people over the course of a week or 2 weeks up in the mountains, you're expected to have like a certain level of fitness. And at that point, you don't ever want to be anxious or worried about whether or not you can keep up or whether or not you're going to feel good up there. Like you want that to be second nature, so that when you finally do get up there and you're working, the only thing you're worried about is getting the right photo. Yeah, I just like this photo. It's the colors.
The light,
yeah,
unbelievable.
nice colors.
And
Yeah,
Eliza,
early
did Patagonia know that you're a runner when they hired you for this?
Yeah.
Is that a requirement? I have to assume that it was.
I mean, it's not so much as I mean, like my relationship with Patagonia, I know a lot of the guys in the photo editing department now, and they know the sports that I do. They are usually up to date with the places that I'm going. But yeah, over the last like couple of years, I've really just been shooting a lot more trail running. And then at a certain point, they just kind of reach out and they're like, if we hire you to come on this thing and run for 25 miles, like, can you do that? And you're like, yeah, sure. Yeah. So there is definitely a expectation.
Yeah. I was just going to say, maybe you mentioned this, but it's hard for me to tell at least if it's very early in the morning or if it's sundown.
Sundown. Yeah. This was actually after dinner, and we had sort of just been around the table talking about the product and eating dinner. And then literally the lights started to get really good, and I was looking out the window and I was like, so, you know, like those things that we were talking about on this pack that you weren't sure about, I was like, what if we could test them right now for like the next, 40 minutes? And so we just like sprinted up the hill. Yeah, it was super beautiful that evening.
That's funny, right after dinner.
Oh yeah, they actually, there were some funny comments made during this evening. Yeah.
Eliza, can you talk about carrying a camera on a trail? That's the thing that always tweaks me out about shooting big mountain running, is like keeping up with athletes while
holding a camera.
Like a camera kit on you.
Yeah, it's really not that crazy, but I think like after a while, I mean, if you're doing enough long runs, even if you didn't have a camera in your pack, like your running vest starts to weigh down a bit anyways. You're carrying a lot of water, you're maybe carrying a bunch of food. So you're kind of like used to having that weight. And so for me, actually, I use a running vest. It's an old Patagonia running vest that's totally discontinued at this point, but I think it's like a 9-liter vest. And that kind of has this great drawstring bag like in the back. And so it's just really easy to open it. And I'll literally wrap my DSLR up in a jacket, throw it in there. And I kind of, I know now how to position it perfectly so that it's not like bumping into my back or anything like that. And then and then you can just go. But yeah, I mean, weight is certainly an issue. When I go out and I'm shooting trail running, especially if I'm trying to keep up with people, I'll usually bring maybe 2 lenses if I know that there's like a handful of shots that I really want to get. If I don't have any idea like what is coming my way in terms of like what the compositions are going to be and what the scenery is going to be, like I'll just throw in 1 lens with my body, or I just won't even bring my like big camera to begin with. I'll just throw in my Rx100 and just like be like, maybe there'll be something sweet and see what I can get.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right, we have one more photo before we jump into some questions.
Yeah. So I picked this one to share just because it's pretty different, and it was a different type of creative exercise and shoot for me. I had a client, Mountain Hardware, who specifically asked for an infrared campaign, a photo shoot around infrared imagery, and really just asked me to like get kind of weird and creative with use strobes and fisheye lenses and infrared cameras and just all the like kind of like all the weirder ends of the photo spectrum, and just trying to combine them with classic rock climbing imagery, with the sort of brand marketing idea being to shoot kind of what's classic and what's similar to classic rock climbing imagery, but from a sort of new place, which is in line with the story and the themes that they wanted to touch on as a brand. And so this image, this in the Needles, California, which is an amazing rock climbing area, one of my favorites. And the climbers on thin ice, which is a classic like 10C. And I had shot this route before. I had shot something similar to this exact photo before. I had spent a lot of time shooting in the Needles over the last 5 years or so, almost all of which was just for fun and not for paid work. But I think that there's a nice lesson in that, because you know, I wasn't thinking at the time when I was climbing and shooting in the Needles like I was preparing for a shoot with a client one day. I was just like, wow, this is beautiful, and I really like climbing here. And you know, but then it ended up being really helpful to produce a campaign style shoot, because we could really maximize the day. It was like, okay, climbers are on this tower on this route at this moment, and like we'll be on this other tower at that moment, and then they'll go over to this other tower and we'll go over to that other tower, and then we'll shoot, you know. And it was by having climbed a lot of those routes and having shot some of those photos before, and just knowing what's going on there, it allowed, otherwise you'd show up and you'd be like, what, okay, climb that and we'll figure it out. You know, it's a lot harder to plan a shoot that way. So, but yeah, no, that's this image. The colors are cool. It's a weird thing shooting in infrared. They're kind of faux pas colors, and it has a completely different like technical side to it. But it was cool to explore that a little bit.
Yeah, what are the differences there when you're going to shoot a photo? What are some differences with that type of camera rather than like a DSLR or mirrorless?
Yeah, so infrared, it turns out, works better with mirrorless. So infrared is a conversion on an existing camera. You're basically removing elements of the sensor stack and maybe adding elements depending on what type of infrared. But so a camera is very highly designed to capture light in the visible range, which is what we see with our eyes and what we experience with the world. But the visible range is a very small percentage of all wavelengths of light that are traveling at any moment in time. And an infrared camera just shifts what type of spectrum the camera is capturing, and it shifts it into the infrared. And there's 4 different types of infrared camera that focus on different wavelength ranges. And you basically are running a spectrum from kind of pure black and white photography, which I think is the highest, not like 800 nanometer wavelengths, to the lowest spectrum, which I think is like 550 nanometer wavelengths, which is more this false color stuff, and it kind of runs that spectrum. But you see things very different. It's kind of weird when you do the really pure black and white one. It's the first time I've looked through an electronic viewfinder and been like, this looks like an Ansel Adams photo. It's a weird, really contrasty black and white that evokes that sort of classic Ansel Adams feel.
Right.
An infrared camera in black and white just kind of looks like that naturally, which is pretty cool. And the color stuff, you really have to work it in post to have the colors not feel flat. But yeah, I don't know, it's just a whole different genre of photography, really.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, we have some questions prepared, and then we'll also be taking some questions from the audience here. So we wanted to jump into some of those. Caitlin, I know you wanted to chat a bit about this.
I did, yeah. So Eliza, you have this really cool photo a day project that you've been doing forever. So I guess I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that and, you know, kind of speak about the impact that doing that long-term project has actually had on your work with brands.
Yeah. Yeah, the photo of the day project is now 5 years running, or I guess I'm in my 5th year of doing the photo of the day. There it is, or there's part of the grid. Yeah, it's, you know, I gave this project to myself, I think at the beginning of 2016. I was kind of at a weird place in my life, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I'd been working in the film world for a couple years, and yeah, I was just kind of having a bit of an existential crisis. And honestly, the photo of the day project was kind of just like this last ditch effort to kind of be like, do I want to keep doing this? And maybe if I give myself more of a routine of just like forcing myself to shoot, maybe this like love for photography will sort of like reemerge, or it won't, and then I'll know, you know, whether to sort of like move on and try something else. And it worked. I love the photo day project. I finished the first year, so I did all of 2016, and the only rule is you just have to take one photo a day. There's no theme, there's no type of camera you have to shoot on, there's no time of day. I mean, it's literally just one photo every single day for an entire year, which sounds really simple in practice, but it's actually a lot harder than you think. And one of the reasons for that is because, you know, it's really easy to take a photo if you're in a beautiful place or surrounded by friends and you just feel inspired, but that doesn't happen every single day of the entire year. There's so many days where you're just sort of like stuck at home, maybe you're sick or it's bad weather outside, you're doing work, you're just editing all day or answering emails, and then all of a sudden it's like 11:30 at night and you're just like, oh shit, I haven't taken a photo yet, walking around the house trying to be like, how can I make the refrigerator look as creative as possible? And so I just think it's a really fun challenge to just like constantly be training your mind to think creatively, and even in like the most mundane circumstances. Because again, it's like not that hard to create a really cool photo if you're out adventuring every single day. What's really hard is like shooting a wooden spoon on a table, you know, when there's zero light out because it's 11:45 at night. And yeah, it's been a really fun project. I honestly can't imagine stopping. I finished 2016 and then immediately was like, I have to do another year, and then finished 2017. It's just been like every single year now. It's so habitual at this point, like there's no possible way I could go to bed without remembering to take a photo. And
it sounds so anxiety provoking to me.
I mean, it totally was. When I was like first starting out, like the first 3 months of like 2016, it was, I had an alarm set on my phone at like 10:30 every single night that was just like, have you taken a photo? And there were many times that the alarm went off and I was like, oh, thank God, like I totally would have forgotten. And now it's just, you know, 5 years in, it's so ingrained in my being that the idea of missing a day and not taking a photo, yeah, it just doesn't happen anymore. But it's such a fun way to like look back at the year, and I always like kind of create a grid then of like all the images, and I can just look at any one of these images and be completely transported back into that moment of time and know exactly what that feeling was like, you know, when I took that photo, what that, maybe not what the whole day was like, but it's like a really cool like photo diary, you know, at the end of the day. And it's impacted my career majorly, not necessarily because I've gotten work out of it or anything like that, but it's just like if you're taking a photo every single day and constantly practicing and constantly thinking creatively in non-creative situations and forcing yourself to take photos that you're not used to taking, or honestly just using it too as a tool to practice different things. I mean, there's so many photos in here that are terrible photos, and then I'll just be like, okay, this photo sucks, but like I'm gonna do weird editing techniques with it for the next 2 hours and just like practice something different. And so yeah, it's not a portfolio of my best work, but it's, you know, it's a portfolio of like of my life and things that I see, and it's a fun way to sort of also just see what catches my eye,
yeah,
what I'm drawn to. Yeah.
Sorry, my dog keeps.
Very, very cool. That's okay. That's okay. We all got some friends at home keeping us company.
Yeah.
Let's get a question for you, Ted. So initially, we spoke about this in your intro. You worked in the clean energy market. So what was it like working with the Honnold Foundation, and how did that impact your career?
Yeah. I guess I'll take a sec just to describe some of that background that led
Sure.
to working with the Honnold Foundation. But yeah, I basically was really oriented around clean energy for most of my adult life, really, in school and then going to graduate school, focusing on it. And then I went to New York. I worked for the Natural Resources Defense Council, and then got sort of picked up by Bloomberg as a financial analyst focused on clean energy markets, and then worked for an investment fund focused on clean energy. And then switched into sort of an operating role in startups in San Francisco, focused on solar electrification in rural areas, which is a really kind of neat combination of all of the elements of clean tech into sort of like one product package, because it has lithium-ion batteries and solar and LEDs and smart grid technology and telecom connectivity. And we basically were able to, in Tanzania, the company that I worked for, we powered more Tanzanians than the government of Tanzania powered over a 5-year period, which was pretty cool. But it was just an exciting clean tech play, I guess. And so I kind of come from that background and have been a climber and adventurer all through that time. And at some point met Alex, I think at a speaking event. And he had recently started his foundation, maybe like a year or so prior. And we just were talking about some of the work that I did in this field, and it overlaps significantly with his ambitions for his foundation. So we ended up chatting a lot more, and I ended up helping him with putting together some projects. We put a project together in Angola. And then a few years later, we put a project together in Kenya, and they were kind of random in the sense that they were a weird like hybrid of media climbing expedition with solar philanthropic project management. It's like a lot of things going on. The Angola one, HBO Vice made a whole video about, and it was just a really surreal experience. Alex was outrageously famous in Angola in like 2015, like well before Free Solo. Like we landed in the airport, people followed us. We drove like 8 hours to the climbing zone, and helicopters and like ambulances, escorts were like, we didn't ask for any of this, and people were just really fascinated by Alex Honnold and knew about him. So it was a really weird and surreal experience. But so I guess the answer, so the question is like, how did it affect my career? And I think the truest answer is that, you know, that was sort of it was a push, I guess, or a strong impetus to just focus on what I really wanted to do, which was the, you know, content creation, media, adventure media world. I had sort of flirted between a pretty traditional like white collar career type life trajectory and this really sort of Wild West adventure freelance media creator lifestyle. And those trips with Alex, I think, gave me maybe the courage to like to take that leap. Not right away. It still took a few years to quit my career, sort of abandon something I had worked to build over a long time period. But eventually that's what happened, and these trips definitely played a meaningful role in that. Yeah.
Cool.
Love that
Another
shot.
question here. Yeah.
And this is a question. Yeah, this is a question we've actually been getting kind of periodically through. Sorry, Jeremy, next slide.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so this is a question we keep getting from the audience, and luckily we had the same question. So people are just wondering about, you know, gear, what both of you use. Eliza, maybe you want to go first, but I think most of the questions have been about photo gear, but a few questions also actually have been about, travel gear. You talked about the running vest, Eliza, so I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Sure. Camera gear, I shoot with Canon, the 5D Mark IV, and then just have an array of their lenses. And then honestly, the only other camera that I'd say that I kind of like pack with me all the time, I think I mentioned before, is a Sony Rx100. Highly, highly recommend that camera. It's a tiny little, actually I have it right here, I'll show you. It's a teeny tiny little pocket camera. Takes really good photos. It also films 4K, and it can just fit into a breast pocket or clip to your harness, or different things like that. But it's especially when the adventure is the priority and the photos are the second priority, that is the camera that I bring with me every single time. And that's more of like if I have a second, I'll take it out and I'll take some photos. If the photos are more of the first priority, I'll always bring my Canon with me. But I mean, I think Ted would agree with this. Most people in the adventure photography world, I mean, we try and bring the smallest amount of gear with us as possible, because you want it to be really light. You want every single expedition to be as light as possible. You don't want to be carrying more than you need. And so typically for me, I would say on average, I'll bring 2 lenses. And my go-to lenses, I would say, are probably the 24-70 2.8, and then I'll bring a 35 1.4 with me for low light, keep it wide. And then in terms of adventure gear, you just gotta you gotta test things out. There's not like one type of backpack or one type of running vest, or I don't know, climbing little pack or something like that. You just gotta see what works for you. Because I'm sure Ted and I shoot super differently in terms of like how we pack things too, and we would totally bring different packs with us. But if you're a runner and you want to shoot more trail running, you're worried about the gear, I'd just throw in the RX100 for now. I mean, even an iPhone, is like a good thing to just like start practicing with. And then as you want to get more and more professional shots, you can see what running with a DSLR or mirrorless in your backpack feels like. It's a fun experience.
What about you, Ted?
Similar philosophy for sure. Try to keep it as light and minimalist as possible. I shoot on Nikon cameras, on the Z7 mostly, their newest mirrorless camera, which for still photography, I do believe is the best, among the sort of Sony, Canon, Nikon. I think the video components of that camera are not as good or better with some of its competitors, but for still photography, it's almost like Nikon sort of is like, okay, we're gonna like focus on the still side and let these other companies focus on the video side, is kind of what it feels like. But I think maybe more like of a general point is it's really easy right now, and just in general, to get overly focused on the gear side. I think with all this stuff, there's so much, marketing and internet research and activity around latest camera specs and latest cameras, and it's a constant. It's like an arms race among these companies to be one-upping each other, and they're getting better and better, and that's awesome. It's great for consumers. The company stock prices aren't doing well. I don't know if you've noticed that. All not doing well. But you don't need, just look at like what Ansel Adams carried around for it. It's ridiculous. You can capture amazing content with gear from 10 years ago. Gear like helps. It is important to a certain extent, and especially like the more professional you get, or the higher the budgets, or the more serious it gets, in that sense, the more you want to make sure you have the best gear. But for most scenarios, it's like you don't need to keep up with that arms race. You don't need to like obsess over which lens is the sharpest, or which camera has the most megapixels, or which autofocus system is better, or which one has more high dynamic range, or which, all these things. It's like the gear's good, just like get out and use it.
And the other problem too is that like in 6 months that camera is going to be outdated anyways.
Right.
So it's like yeah, I totally agree with you, Ted. Yeah, you can't.
Definitely a
focus too
moving
much on
target.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Sweet.
Good to know. Before we jump into this photo, this question, which is a fun one, I wanted to let everyone know we're going to run over for a little bit after 1 p.m. Eastern time, but we do want to take some questions from the audience, some more questions. So everyone who can stick around, thank you so much. For anyone who has to hop, we are recording this, so we'll be releasing the recording early next week. But let's jump into this photo, and then, I keep saying that, this question, and then we'll take some more questions from the audience before we wrap up. So I guess we can start with Eliza again. What's a photo fail you've experienced, and what happened, if you have any that come to mind?
The photo fail, you fail like every single day. It's like every, like all the time, especially when you're shooting like action sports. There's always, it's always like there's always going to be out of focus frames. There's always going to be blurriness. I've been lucky. I've never like dropped a camera. I've never really broken anything too bad. I did like slip while I was filming once and like bashed in the lens to a rock, but it still works. Well, the manual focus doesn't work, but no, wait, it's the other way around. The manual focus works, but the autofocus doesn't. It's still fine. Photo fail. There's just this one time when I was like, I don't know, a little bit more green. I'd say it was like 5 or 6 years ago. It was less of a photo fail and more of a technicality fail, where I was trying to figure out how much memory I still had left on an SD card. And so I decided to like go into the formatting option on my menu to sort of see like on the bar if it had been, if it was like 50 gigs of 64, or if it was, whatever. And instead of pressing cancel, I just said okay and just formatted my entire memory card of like 5 days worth of images or something. And luckily none of them, wasn't for work or anything like that. They were all personal photos, but I was just like, and they're gone.
Brutal. Tragic.
Oh, yeah, tragic.
What about you, Ted?
Yeah, I feel like I'm constantly failing, or failing upwards, or failing, I don't know, trying to create meaningful art and mostly failing. I think that's maybe part of what it means to try to be an artist. I can share one funny story, I guess, which is just that there was a shoot in Chile to shoot the solar eclipse. I guess it was like 9 months ago or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but it was for a big film project, like the biggest one I've been a part of. It was like a Hollywood team making like a proper movie with proper movie equipment. And I had done a similar eclipse shot, actually this shot right here, a year or two previous, and they saw that and they sort of hired me almost as like a consultant to help them. They wanted to film a movie scene that looked like that, and so like in Hollywood style, they're like, "We'll hire consultants," and we'll, and so they wrote me into this thing, and it was in Chile, and when it happens, it's like a minute or a minute and a half. It's not that long, and then the actual like framing of your subjects within it might even be less time than that. That might be like 15 seconds. And so we are in the middle of nowhere in the high desert of Chile, on like a cactus-strewn, like rocky landscapes, and the talent is like a mile away up on a hill, and there's a lot of people involved, and they have this huge camera, this like RE LF or at 1,500 millimeter lens with like their whole kit was like super expensive, and they had numerous people, like one on each tripod leg, and they're sort of running backwards as it's happening, trying to keep like the subject in line with the eclipse as it's rising. They're like moving backwards, so it sort of stays in the same spot. And so one of the dudes like steps on a cactus, it like goes right through his shoe, like punctures his foot. He like drops a tripod leg, the like camera comes off the tripod. Someone like basically like diving catches this like crazy expensive camera. I'm like with my littler camera setup, but somehow for some reason my tripod like spontaneously combusts as this is happening. It like falls off and it like comes off the connection point. All of a sudden I'm handheld and they're handheld and we're just like and so we just throw the ISO like pretty high and decide to just go handheld with it. And it ended up working. They ended up getting like a really sick shot, which was, I got a shot too, but like it was like mostly about them getting their shot, and it worked, but it was like so stressful. We couldn't believe.
Sounds like a circus.
Yeah, it's just shenanigans, but
Lucky turn of events.
Yeah.
Great. With the time we have left, even though we're running over, we wanted to take some questions from the audience, and then we'll even have these two ask each other a question. But I wanted to get some from the audience if there's any great stuff, Caitlin, in the questions box.
Yeah, we just got a recent question that's about starting out and how you two marketed yourselves. And Ted, maybe you want to start with that. Obviously, you kind of touched on that maybe a little bit with just your relationship with Alex earlier, but I'm wondering if you have any other tips for the audience.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's a really hard industry. It's I think the stuff I did with Alex strangely didn't actually like, for how famous he is. It wasn't like I did some stuff with Alex and then like, oh, now I've like made it and I'm on my way. It didn't really work like that. It didn't really feel like that. It was more just like a valuable experience and friendship. I think like I personally really focused on social media because I think social media is how one markets themselves in today's day and age. And especially how an artist or a creative markets their work. There are other, things. Like if you're like a logo designer, you probably want to market yourself on Fiverr or, there's other platforms, but like internet, really leveraging the power of the internet to your advantage is a more general way of saying it. So I definitely focused on that. But I think the truth of like the adventure photography space is it's extremely competitive. It's very competitive. It's a really tough space to crack into. And I've always sort of told the reason I sort of left a career that frankly was like a lot better paying and like a lot more financially secure was because like I couldn't imagine like living my whole life not pursuing this. Like I just couldn't. That was too deep of a regret, or I was very scared that would be too deep of a regret. And so I think if you love something that much, if you're like that just intrinsically motivated by something and by the fundamental process of it, not just the end result, but like you love hiking up mountains or you love rock climbing, or you love trail running, and you just like, that's what you want to do and you want to capture it because you see these beautiful things and you just all of the elements or most of the elements of the actual process you're just in love with, then like just do it, and it'll work out. I mean, it will. It's going to be hard. It's not an easy road to travel, but it will work out if you really put your time in and you develop your craft and you build it up.
Yeah.
I really believe that. So, yeah.
Anything to add, Eliza?
I mean, I would mostly, I'd agree with Ted. It's a super hard industry to crack into. But one of the things that I think goes a long way is if you're interested in these sports, go to these places where a lot of these people are going to be recreating. And I'm not necessarily saying like go and try and find pro athletes. I think you can go out with your friends and everything like that. But I do think there is something to be said about like building your network within this industry. And it's a little bit easier said than done because so many of these people that you want to meet and want to be in touch with and want to get your foot in the door, they're going to be climbing next to you at the crag, or they're going to be mountain biking, you know, outside. And, you know, like it is easier to actually sort of like bump into these people if you're in the right spaces and you're spending some time there. Granted, it is a huge privilege to be able to have that time and, you know, space and resources to sort of like go live in Yosemite for, you know, a number of weeks. But yeah.
Awesome. Lots of questions about post-processing and editing. So I'm wondering if you, Ted, maybe you can start again, if you want to share just kind of what your go-to program is and sort of how much editing you end up doing, things like that.
Yeah, it depends on the assignment and the client. My personal style, or what I gravitate towards, is probably heavier on the post-processing side. Like I like to accentuate reality a little bit. I like to almost make it feel like magical realism, but like to a really subtle degree, rather than going great. Like what I've tried to do is teach myself sort of the best from landscape photographers' editing techniques, and take like, you know, 10% of that into a documentary adventure context. If I'm like shooting something that might go to an editorial client, like the best and highest example of it would be like National Geographic, you're not going to edit it almost at all. It's going to be like basically what does the raw image look like. You might move like a few sliders, but you're going to really be simple with the edit process for that kind of a thing. I use Lightroom mostly, but for my published work, a lot of it I'll bring into Photoshop after Lightroom to just like continue to massage the image, to like pop it a little bit more, to maybe shift the colors just a little bit more so they're more complementary. Or you know, I have some pretty specific post-processing things that I do that just kind of add more micro contrast and just like pop it a little bit more. But yeah, those are some of my thoughts on editing.
Nice. What about you, Eliza?
Yeah, my editing workflow is pretty simple. I don't love over processing my images, and so it's kind of like bring them in and work them a little bit just to make the images pop. I usually tend to run on the more high contrasted realm of editing. But yeah, to me, it just, yeah, I don't know. I like to just keep it simple. I also just like don't like spending that much time in front of my computer either. So I think that probably plays a little bit of role with it. But if I'm doing like large batches of editing, I'll use Lightroom. But honestly, for like editing like my photo of the day or something like that, I'll just drag into Photoshop and just use like camera raw editing, just like quickly mess with it and export. Pretty simple.
Cool. So I have one more question, and then I'll probably turn it over to you two if you want to ask each other one. But someone asked about the sort of increasing use of drones, and if it's affected your business, and if either of you, use them. Eliza, maybe you want to start with that?
It's a cool question.
Yeah. Drones are, I mean, I don't know what to say about this. I was going to say, drones are so annoying, but they produce incredible visuals. It's next to unheard of now to go on a film shoot and you don't have a drone. It is really difficult though if you're trying to film in like national parks. Obviously, they're prohibited in all national parks. But a drone is the easiest way to enhance any film, hands down. And at this point, they're so easy to fly. They're not even that expensive. I mean, all of the frat bros have them. Like, like everybody has a drone at this point. So yeah, I do think they're really, really great for elevating a film. I will only bring one if I need to. I just find that they're really annoying. I mean, the buzzing sound is just so obnoxious. But yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Ted?
I totally agree. I was gonna say the exact same thing, that they're super annoying, but awesome from a content creation
Yeah.
perspective. In terms of them like challenging or taking away work or anything, I don't think that's a thing. You just can't. I mean, for a few reasons, you can't recreate getting an actual person in a position with a real camera with different focal lengths. I mean, drones are basically all 20 millimeters on a sensor that's like smaller than your iPhone sensor. It's really good for video because it's so stabilized. It's so smooth, so it's great for video. But for photos, it's like it's equivalent to like, yeah, you can fly an iPhone anywhere in the sky, but that's really different than like being there and shooting it with a professional camera with an array of lenses. And so I don't really think that's so much of a threat. I think it's an opportunity. I do think that like continuing the technological progress, and we've never had more tools. Basically, we have so many tools for content creation, and that's awesome. And like staying up on as many as possible is totally a full-time job, and learning new skill sets you can do for the rest of your life. And if like you're motivated by that, that's rad. FPV drones are really cool right now. They produce amazing content. It's kind of on a more bleeding edge of the drone spectrum, but yeah, I don't know. It's really hard to get permits for drone. I feel like as soon as you're doing drone stuff, like you're on a different level of production, you're getting permits, you're applying 6 months in advance. You have to have a license. You have to be a licensed pilot. It's not like it used to be maybe 5 years ago, where for a lot of places you could just fly them. There are still places like that, but it's mostly outside of North America.
It's really regulated. Yeah.
Yeah, and for good reason.
Totally.
Yeah.
Should be.
Not the. I was implying you thought otherwise. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it's all. It's all good stuff there. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I thought I'd turn it over to you two. Ted, I would love to have you start and ask Eliza a question, and then we'll trade and we'll wrap this up.
All right. I kind of forgot.
You're really building it up before.
I'll try.
Anything you're genuinely curious about.
Yeah. Well, I kind of had to. I'll just go with one of them. Okay, so Eliza, you live in some pretty rad spots, or it seems like you spend most of your time kind of between like Chamonix, Boulder, Colorado zones, and Yosemite. And maybe there's plenty of other spots, but it seems like those 3 spots are pretty like resonant for you. So like hypothetically, if you could only live in one of those places for the rest of your life, like you could never leave the boundary of those places ever again.
Oh my gosh.
Which place would you choose?
I'd probably pick Chamonix, in France. Just because every season is perfect for a different activity. And I can just eat, croissants every single day. So
you get better health care too. So
yeah, that's true.
You go there now, or do you have dual citizenship, or how does that work for you?
No, I don't. I have sort of like a second residency card, but that doesn't really like get me anywhere, especially right now. I was thinking about trying to like look into the whole visa process of like if I actually wanted to try and escape there. My sister lives there full time, which is one of the reasons why I can get over there a lot. But I don't know. I had plans to be there for most of the summer, and that's not happening. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, good answer. I got to get there. I've never been there. It's like so high on my list. But
it's a playground. It's absurd. I mean, it's like you take a tram all the way up to like 13,000 feet, and then all of a sudden you're like alpine climbing, but it, like a half hour before you were drinking coffee, eating croissants downtown. It's absolutely
rad.
Yeah.
It sounds like Patagonia, but like way more civilized.
It's like Patagonia, but Disneyland. Like if Patagonia was like a
Yeah.
Disneyland. All these rides and tours and everything that you can do. Yeah, totally.
That's
Totally
awesome.
absurd. Yeah.
Yeah. One day.
Should I ask my
Eliza,
question?
yeah, do you have one for Ted?
Sure.
Yeah, well, I was actually just interested because I know a lot of us had a lot of work canceled this year because of the pandemic. Was there a particular shoot that you were really, really excited to do, or a place that you were really excited to go that got canceled? And how bummed are you about that?
Yeah, there's definitely work canceled. Like the first 2 or 3 months after the pandemic, whatever existed, and a lot of it, you know how it is. It's kind of like some things are really set up, and then you're locked in many months in advance. But that's
Yeah.
kind of the exception. A lot of times it's a little more like loose, in that something will probably happen, and you'll probably go on this assignment, but it's all kind of coming together up until it actually happens. And so there were a number of things like that, just different shoots, mostly in North America. But then, the marketing budgets and just the overall like psych for a company to get involved with something new just like completely vanished.
Oh yeah.
So that's been concerning and definitely scary. Things are coming back. It's different. It's not to the same degree. But there were also, I noticed like a lot of things. There were like 3 different projects that were done that were going to be published, like to market something that I had been a part of, that were put on hold indefinitely as well, just because it's like a bad time to. There's just been so much going on. It's like companies don't want to put this thing out about,
selling a t-shirt. It's like insensitive. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that they don't necessarily want to market right now. So it's a really weird time for all that, but go through waves of positivity, negativity. I think it's just about, for me, like I've been trying very hard to just focus on learning, time to learn new skill sets. It is a great opportunity because it is hard to have a big chunk of time to learn a new thing. Life kind of just, does what it does, and then you don't have the time anymore. And so trying to really treat it as an opportunity to have time to learn things is maybe a good mindset. How about you?
Absolutely.
Probably a lot of things.
Yeah, and just like trips, like a lot of trips sort of getting canceled. But yeah, this is like the longest I've ever stayed in one place in like the last 5 years, which is kind of fun. It's like a little domestic, but it's nice, different.
Good spot.
Yeah, not a terrible spot to hang out, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. I think Jeremy probably wants to wrap this up a little bit, but I really cannot thank you both enough, and I loved your questions.
Thanks so much for having us. This was really fun.
Yeah. I do not want to wrap it up, to be honest, but we have to stop at some time. I wanted to reiterate the thanks to both of you. I wanted to hype up our Instagrams. For anyone who stuck around, thanks so much. Go follow us on Instagram at Eliza_Earl, at Ted Hesser, at PhotoShelter. Lots of great stuff over there. I'm going to leave this up for 1 second so anyone that wants to pop over there. But this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for taking the time to hop on here with us, to both Ted and Eliza. Before we do sign off officially, there's one more thing. For anyone who doesn't know, PhotoShelter has a podcast, comes out every week. Our co-founder and a former employee and a great photo editor and photographer, Sarah Jacobs, co-host that. We talk about photography and culture and technology, recent photo news and stuff like that. It's a lot of fun. More of a lax conversation like this, but around different photography topics. So definitely check that out wherever you find podcasts. And a big thank you again to everyone who's still here, and to the 2 awesome photographers who joined us today.
Thanks so
Thank you
much.
both.
Thanks for
Yeah, thanks a
hosting.
lot. It's fun.
Yeah. All right, everyone, we'll see you next time.
All right, take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.